My name is Rick Mogil. I'm the Program Director for Suicide Bereavement Services here at the Suicide Prevention Center. I provide counseling, outside counseling primarily, but counseling for people who have lost someone to suicide. I have groups, support groups for them. I do debriefings in the home when there's been a suicide, usually within the first 30 days, and outreach. I go out into the community and talk about suicide prevention. So I came here because my brother died by suicide in 2003, and I went through the groups, and once I went through that program, I just knew this is something I had to do. I really did. So it's my passion, and I couldn't see myself doing anything else. I kind of think that the difference I make in people's lives would be just giving them a voice, a safe place to talk about their loss, first of all. A perfect stranger who's willing to listen. And I get that from them days, weeks, years later, if they haven't met me before, and they hear my voice and they go, oh my gosh, you're the person I talked to. That's who I am. I do maybe 3-4 intakes a day. I take calls where I set up intakes for me to do, but I let them tell their story if that's what they need to do. I provide some measure of comfort and maybe hope, because my loss is 16 years old and theirs may be fresh and they don't know what it's going to be like. My brother and I both have asthma and allergies. His were much worse than mine. We'd have to get up in the morning with him and use a warm washcloth to clear the crust from his eyes after overnight, with his eyes weeping. By the time he got to school, in elementary school, his eyes start weeping again, and kids being kids are going to pick on somebody who's different. And we never sought any kind of help. Doctors had to come to the house to give us shots of adrenaline when our asthma got bad. Couldn't participate in sports. So we both had very low self-esteem. The only difference between the two of us really is when Ed went into that dark place, all he could see was the darkness. Whereas I go into the dark place and I would look up eventually and see the light and try to climb out. He was self-medicating through junior high, high school. In fact, he was growing pot in a little box outside his window attached to the windowsill. Mom would go by and go, oh, Ed's going to be a horticulturist. Look at those beautiful plants he's growing. Clueless, but he started with alcohol and drugs, and that was his self-medicating. He never sought any help. He threatened in his 20s, but even after rescuing him and getting him to a hospital to check in, he never followed up with the medication, with the doctors, and he just kept going, getting worse. He was working in a chicken hatchery as a manager, and when the next people that took over the hatchery, a major corporation, they liked what he was doing and wanted him to teach other managers to do it. And he had to go and do public speaking, which he would never do. And he felt like he was being pressured, and there was just too much for him. And eventually it was his wife's birthday. Excuse me. It was his wife's birthday, and they went away for the weekend. And it was probably the best weekend they've spent together, because they always had the grandchildren with them. And that next morning, he went off to work and didn't come back. He drove 200 miles to the coast up in Oregon with his best friends, Smith and Wesson, and he didn't want anybody in the family to find him. So when we found out, I always thought at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd get a call that he had driven off a cliff because he was drunk or high. I never ever thought that he would kill himself, let alone use a gun. And so when we finally got the word, it was devastating. I'm the oldest of 4 boys, and at that moment, I actually thought I was the eldest of 3 now. And 2 or 3 years later, I finally realized Ed's still my brother. That didn't change. So I am the eldest of 4. And after I went through the groups, I just knew this was something I had to do. Suicide is an option for somebody who's in pain, mental pain. And what they're thinking about is ending the pain, not necessarily their lives, not realizing anything they're going to do is going to kill themselves. And I think that was true with Ed. He got to a point where there were no other options for him. His perception is that there were no other options. And it is, the way I like to explain it is, suicide or mental illness is an illness. It's like any other illness that can kill you. So it's like heart disease and diabetes and cancer and HIV/AIDS. They all attack a different part of your body and cause your death. Mental illness affects this organ right up here and makes you the instrument of your death. So it's, I don't like the word choice. In the end result, they are making a choice, but they've been given a very narrow focus, because when they get tunnel vision at that point, they just want to end the pain, and they'll do anything. And they can't see outside of that. Ed had beautiful granddaughters that he always was around, and the smile on his face when he was with those girls was different than his everyday smile. He couldn't be happy. And so he may have felt he was a burden to them. That's possible. We never talked about it. But I hear it all the time in talking to survivors on the phone and in groups. You know, the person either told them they felt they were a burden, or they left a note saying they felt that the family would be better off. And that's their perception again. It's distorted by the mental illness, depression, bipolar disorder, whatever else. That's in 90% of the cases. There are times when it happens so quickly that they don't have a chance to think about what's going on. A survivor once told me that the suicide of her son was like he took a grenade, pulled the pin, and threw it in the middle of the family. And the shrapnel from that explosion wounded everybody. And it doesn't matter how many layers out a family are or friends, they're all wounded by this event. It's devastating. It's life-changing. You know, we're all on different paths now because someone has taken their life. A loved one, a family friend, it could be a coworker, a student, it could be anybody that we know. And I hear this all the time, that they talk about their younger children aren't talking to them anymore because, you know, they're afraid that they're going to die, especially if daddy killed himself, or then the older folks or the parents of a child are grieving differently, and they can't bring that together. We try to keep them separate in a group, but sometimes it's more important for the parents to be together, so we work with them on what's going to be best for them. And it's devastating. The ripple effect is huge. And there's a diagram, and I can't explain it too well, but here's the suicide. Here's the first level of people that are affected, which is immediate people that are really close to the person. Then there's the next level, the people that knew the person, maybe worked with them, and others. And then the bigger picture, the global. I mean, think of Robin Williams. This man was in our families for how many decades? We watched him on TV. We watched him in the movies. We loved him. He made us laugh. He made us cry. And when he killed himself, it wasn't just his family that suffered. They suffered the most. And as it went out, it was around the world. People were suffering because of this loss. And I can't even tell you how many people were, well, I can tell you that the crisis line, the calls went up after his suicide. As I've mentioned, my brother and I are similar in a lot of respects, other than the allergies and asthma. Excuse me. We both suffer from depression. His much worse than mine. I have had, and still have, passive suicidal ideation, and that's since before I was a teenager. And with that, that's wanting to die, but not wanting to do anything. Not wanting to participate. I'd be okay if a plane flew over their head and an engine dropped off and squished me. That would be great. But And the plane has to land safely so nobody else gets hurt, of course. But I wouldn't participate in anything. And with Ed, the 3 times we know of that he threatened, and I think one was an attempt. He was drunk and dove into a creek that the water level was really low. I mean, was that intentional, or was it just because he was goofing around? I can look back and probably say he might have been attempting at that time, but the others were threatening to kill himself with a knife. And that's one thing I never did, and I wouldn't even think of doing that. But the ideation can get very dark and heavy. And being in that place, you know, where do you go? It took me, I want to say, I've been married 45 years, so it was just about 35 years, almost 40 years before I told my wife about my ideation and talked about my depression. I never talked about it. I always kept it in, you know. I sought help periodically, but usually it was for life issues, work, and sometimes relationship, but I never talked about the depression, never talked about the ideation until within the last 5, 6 years. I think it's important. I mean, we can all go there sometimes, and most of the time it's just a momentary thing. You know, we get out of it somehow. And I don't know how I do it. I just know that there's some part of me that just really wants to live and wants to continue experiencing what I'm experiencing in my life. You know, my grandkids, my family, my niece getting married finally, and she's almost like a granddaughter to me because her father was like a son to me, 15 and a half years difference. So I got a lot to look forward to, and I just want to continue. And finally reaching out for help. I mean, that's really what helped me the best. And it's important. We're not alone. And we don't walk this journey by ourselves. We have people that love us and want to be with us, and sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes we have to seek professional help, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. If my car breaks down, I can't fix it anymore. God, in my day, there was 3 moving parts, you know? There was the wheel, the squirrel, and the food that the squirrel went after. Now you have all these electronics, and you have to be a master's in, you know, technology. And I take it to the mechanic because they know how to fix it. So I can't fix what's going on in my mind very well. I need help. I don't want them to fix it. I just want them to help me fix it, or at least be able to accept it and work through it.